Welcome back, dear learners. This is Jitendra Singh, Associate Professor in BJMC at IIMT College of Management, and welcome to yet another live session at IIMT platform. Today we would be discussing about the development of television in India. This is one of the important topics of electronic media under the BJMC program, and under the master's program also we always talk about how television developed, how radio and television developed as an independent unit of electronic media in India. So let's begin with television. And when we say television, we talk about the national broadcaster, that is Doordarshan, because Doordarshan was the very first television network that came into India, that existed since 1959 in India, and that is since then it has been providing information and educational broadcast to the masses in India. And we have seen the development of television and television channels in different phases. The first phase was after the independence of India, which came in, started in actually the early 60s actually, and the second phase came during the 90s when the Supreme Court allowed the private television broadcasters to enter in India and open their television networks on Indian land. So then we could see a lot of television, private television channel flourishing in India. So these are two different phases when television came to developed in India with leaps and bounds. And let's begin how television came to India in the very beginning. So this the credit goes to UNESCO, because UNESCO wanted to carry out a study in a developing country like India, where and they wanted to study that whether a country like India could have possibilities of social upliftment, rural development, and the development of the community through television or electronic media. So, because they wanted to carry out a study in a country like India, which was underdeveloped country at that time, so they wanted to know that whether there are possibilities of development if a country like India, which doesn't have an electronic medium, or which doesn't have a developed media of their own. So if they introduce a television network in a country like this, so what kind of the response would they get from this, or would there be any possibility of development through television? So to know these uh, information, they wanted to carry out a study, and they chose India as a platform for this. And we are talking about year 1957, when UNESCO organized a conference which was hosted in Delhi. And in that conference, it suggested that there is a lot of development for a developing country who wants to develop. So they need to actually introduce a social electronic media for them. So they suggested the Indian government also to introduce a television channel. But because there were several reasons at that time, Indian government was actually a newly formed government. We were decolonized. We were recently formed as an individual state, individual country, and for a country like India, it was not really possible to afford such an expensive technology of television, because the people, majority of the people in India were also poor, and the government also could not afford to have such an expensive technology that time. And not only this, but there are certain other reasons also, because television or electronic media was never in the priority list of a developing country like India that time, because there were so the country was already fighting with different problems. There was poverty, there was unemployment, there was a lot of things, there were a lot of problems at that time. And do you spend a lot of money on introducing a technology like television, which was actually considered that time as a medium of comfort or medium of leisure for the people, medium of entertainment. So government thought that why should we invest a lot of money on for the people's comfort, rather than we should develop on the infrastructure of the country. So the government was very much reluctant, was not at all interested in introducing television or any other electronic media, because we already had developed All India Radio and Akashvani, which was running before the independence of India. In 1930s only, we had our own radio network, which was the means of information for the whole country. So UNESCO, because we wanted to carry out a study in in a poor country like India, to know that whether there are any possibilities of development. So they offered a grant uh, to the Indian government. Even the United States of America also offered some grant, and another grant was offered by Philips India Company, which was actually a manufacturer of television equipments, transmitter sets, and other digital equipments that time. And they were looking for actually possibilities for a country like India, where they can definitely they could find a good market, and because of the population of India, they were thinking of a good market from in India. So that is why they initially offered a grant to the Indian government to set up a to set up a television station. And the Philips India company actually provided some low cost transmitters at some reduced rates, and some television sets also. And because that time India had nothing, so they provided some grants, and they provided some equipments. And with the efforts of the UNESCO, the United States of America, and the Philips, and there were some other people also who helped the Indian government to introduce a television channel. And with their efforts, finally, from a makeshift studio means there was no dedicated studio for television. So from the already working studio of All India Radio at Parliament Street in New Delhi, they converted a radio studio into a television studio. That's why we call it a makeshift studio. That was a kind of a temporary arrangement for a television studio they made. And from there, that studio, they made their first broadcast in the year 1959. That was 15th September 1959 was the year. Please remember these dates. These are very important dates, as if you would be appearing in any competitive exams, these dates are always there. So you will get these, you will encounter these dates, and you will have to answer these dates. These are very important dates. This is the first date when television broadcast happened to India from a makeshift studio in Delhi, from the office and premises of All India Radio, Akashvani, that is on the Parliament Street, that it still exists in the All India Radio office. So from there, so it was initially started as an educational project, because okay, one thing more I wanted to add on here, that what we see television today is definitely a medium of entertainment for masses. So mostly the people watch television for what? The people watch television for their entertainment. So the motive today for watching television is different. What it was expected earlier when it was conceived in India was different. Initially, it was conceived as a medium of imparting education and informing the Indian masses. And there was nobody had thought about entertainment, uh, and it was never into the priority of the national broadcaster to entertain the people. Rather, it had thought that we would become as a source of information for the public, and we would be educating our masses. So this was the main objective, the principal objective of introducing television in India. And as we can see today, what television has become now, especially the private channels. So this is why I interrupted here, and I told you this fact, which is very important. Excuse me. And then the first educational broadcast, which I was telling you, happened in 1957. So that television broadcast actually uh, was a part of the agriculture development program, where the Delhi government and the ministries therein working, they made an educational program available for the people of the nearby villages who were staying in Delhi and the nearby areas. So the first educational broadcast happened for them, and what they did that time, they actually opened some around 140 tele clubs. So what is a tele club? Tele club is is actually a kind of an amusement area where which is meant for community watching, where people can come and sit together and discuss on different topics. And there is always there is a television set installed, and they could see that, they could come and observe that announcement happening on television, and then they can go back to their houses. So this is how they opened some 140 teleclubs in and around Delhi, which included, the areas that are the catchment areas, like the villages of the Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and some part of Rajasthan, like Ghaziabad was there, and similarly the Faridabad area, the Sonipat area of the Delhi, which is close to Delhi. So the villages in and around Delhi were actually chosen for that experiment, and they started with 140 teleclubs, and these 140 teleclubs were spread in and around Delhi, in these different states like Delhi, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh. And what they used to do is they used to make some programs which were based on family planning, education, and of course agriculture. So these were the three, four topics principally, which were introduced when for the first broadcast, and they made a program on television, family planning, and education. So these on these topics, they used to make some 20 minutes capsule programs or half an hour programs, and they used to come twice a week. So you can imagine only 1 hour or half hour of duration. They used to come, twice in a week, and those programs were beamed from that television studio in Parliament Street in Delhi, and those programs were observed in those teleclubs, and people used to come from their villages, the nearby villages, and they used to come and watch those broadcasts and those transmission. And this could happen only in the 40-kilometer range in and around Delhi, because at that time we do not have that the latest technologies, and even the world was struggling to get satellite technology in their hands. And India too far had, India also didn't have worked for this technology. So we used to work with low cost transmitters which were provided by the Philips India country, and that helped us to broadcast only in the range of 40 kilometers. That was in the initial years of television, way back in 1959. So that was the project carried out for 1 year, and it successfully ended. And then again, the government did not do anything, because this was just a pilot project, and the government thought it's over, and now let's move on. And we don't need to actually, buy this technology, because buying television set was obviously very, expensive technology. So, and the government was very much clear that if we have this technology, then also the people, because the mostly the people were poor at that time, and they were majority of the people were lower middle class, so they could not afford that technology at that time. So government was very much clear that if we introduce television, we are not going to get a huge response from the side of the public. So if we will not get the viewers, then why should we get television? So the government stayed calm, and they didn't do anything after that project, that 1 year project, and that project went off very well. And again, to measure the effects of the impacts of that particular broadcast and that particular project, which was carried by UNESCO. So UNESCO, because initially offered a grant to the government, so after the end of this 1 year project, UNESCO came, and they conducted a survey. They visited each and every teleclub, and they met with the peoples, and they conducted a study on them, and they find out that what people have learned from those broadcasts, what people have seen on the television channel, and is that was that broadcast anyhow useful for them. So they came to a conclusion that uh, it's a good medium for educating the masses, and people could learn uh, and could remember a lot of things from that broadcast. And if the government wants to have uh, a medium of information, the television would be the perfect one, and the government should think about television and introducing television. So they gave a report to the government, and they actually suggested the Indian government to be serious about introducing television in India. So the first project ended with this, and then again the government kept quiet for a long time. And then in the year 1962, with the pressure of the political leaders, the educationalists, the people from education background, educational institutions, and the pressure groups. So they all pressurized the government and the industrialists, of course, who had seen television abroad. So they pressurized the government and they asked the government to be serious about television and to introduce television in India. So unwillingly, government again took another step, and in the year 1962, government carried out another project, which was called the School TV project. And during that project, government, what they did, because they get the television sets which were installed already in the first project in those tele clubs in and around Delhi. So they took out those television sets and they installed those television sets into certain selected government schools in Delhi. And this time they made um, some programs on science, which where in certain schools where there was no facility of conducting practicals for especially for science subjects. So they installed those television sets there, and they made some programs on educational programs on science, mathematics, and English. And those programs were students were asked to watch those programs in their classrooms, and it was carried out for after till 1 year. And later on, when the program was started, the results of the schools which had television, the students who had watched television programs, and the students who had not, been introduced to television, there was a huge difference in the results. The students who watch television programs, especially the science, English, and mathematics program on television, had done better results, had got a better results, and done well in their exams, while the students who were not exposed to television did not have that better results. So this is another indicator for the government that television is a good medium for education. And now the government was making their uh, planning to introduce television finally, and this is how government slowly took steps, and government started working on television. And in the later 2 3 years, government opened another television station in Mumbai, Kolkata, Madras, then Srinagar, then Lucknow, and till 1975 or after 75, they every year they used to install they form a new uh, television station in every part of every major cities of India, especially population-wise cities like Jalandhar Center was there, Lucknow Center was there, Srinagar Center was opened, Jaipur Center was opened, but this happened later in the later stage. So initially in the major metro cities like Mumbai, at that time it was Bombay, uh, Calcutta, and Madras. These were majorly the cities where we opened the television station. The government opened the television station, and then in 1965, another achievement, another feather was actually added to the crown of Indian television. And so far, here we need to learn one thing, that so far whatever experiments were I have told you were happened in and around Delhi only. These experiments were not observed by people pan India. In each and every corner of the India, of the nation, these programs were not aired, could not be aired, because we do not have satellite technology that time, and the whole world was already struggling to get this technology, and we did not have our own satellite by the time. And this is how, by adding transmitters, by um, high voltage transmitters, we used to beam programs, and this is how we had the television which was happening in and around Delhi only. It was not at all a broadcast which is at national level. This is a point to understand here. And so far, it was not called Doordarshan, and it was again a part of radio only because it existed in the radio station's office, and it was so these television and radio were, because radio was already established brand that time, was already working as a medium of information in India, and television came along with them, and television also started growing. So the next important milestone in the history of television came in the year 1965 when the first broadcast of a Hindi news bulletin. A news bulletin in Hindi was made, and if I'm not wrong, that was read by Pratima Puriji, who was the first television presenter in India, who was actually brought from All India Radio station in Shimla. She was working with Shimla, and Shimla or Jalandhar, I am confused. So she was actually requested to come to Delhi from there, and she was shifted from there, and then she came to and she read the first news bulletin in the year 1965, and this is how television started. A regular service of this half an hour news bulletin and a half an hour program, which used to come on the television. That was a cultural program, or so this is how half an hour news bulletin in Hindi and half an hour cultural program was introduced regularly since then in 1965. So this was the first, another milestone. And then from there, the next 2 years, 1966 or 67, we had another milestone, that was Krishi Darshan. You might be knowing about Krishi Darshan. This is the longest running television program on any television. It is running on Indian television since 1967. It still comes on Doordarshan, and now even on the basis of that program, that was a kind of a program which was dedicated to uh, the farmers of India, and it was to promote agriculture in India and to introduce technology in agriculture. So now we can see that there is a fully dedicated 24 into 7 television channel for agriculture, that is called the Kisan TV, which was introduced some years back by Narendra Modi ji. So now we have a dedicated channel, but it in the background of the channel lies with Doordarshan only, because Doordarshan was Krishi Darshan only, because Krishi Darshan was the principal program, and it actually served the farmers of India. It used to tell them about every pricing of the different cereals and the crops in India, and about the rates of the different mandis, and every information which is important for a farmer was there in that program. So that program, it was actually popularized or introduced like Kisan Bhaiyon ke liye in India. So 67 was the year when Krishi Darshan came to India, and it is one of the longest running programs. So again, I want to tell you that please remember this information, because this is several times you could see this information being asked in different competitive exams. When you're going to appear for competitive exams in future, this question can definitely come to you. So 67 was the year when Krishi Darshan was introduced. This is one of the longest program on television. So now we have 1.5 hour programs which were running on television regularly. It was a regular service, and then television used to shut down after that broadcast. So we had only 1.5 hour program which was running, and then the government started, putting television stations into different nook and corner of the country, like different major cities. Every year they have a target to, introduce and open a radio television station, and the same programs which they had made in Delhi they used to broadcast into that area, and the nearby villages and the people in the nearby areas could watch those television. But national broadcasting as a whole could not happen till now also. Then um, came the one of the major developments. Now the issue was of the autonomy and freedom of radio. because radio uh, was also growing in the growing stage. And because television, after the development of television, people have started thinking that now what is the need of radio, because we can, radio is an oral medium where we were listening to radio announcement, we were listening radio news, we were listening commentaries on radio, and radio was very popular. But with the entry of television, where we could see, live images, where we could see the transmission of events, and we could visually see the events which we earlier used to listen to on radio. So now people have started thinking that what is the need of, what is the utility of radio if there is television? Because television was an audio visual medium. It used to provide us not only the visuals, but also the voice was also there. So with this, and even the way government started, emphasizing on television, the way the government, uh, put more stress on television, the people on radio also thought that now there is a time when we are close to a shutdown, and there might be that the radio would shut down in India. There were people, possibilities. People were thinking like that there is no need of radio anymore. So and they wanted that the radio should not shut down, and the radio should grow independently, because with the emergence of television, the success of the growth of uh, radio as a technology, as a medium, was, some was checked and reduced. So there were, the people wanted to, they appealed the government to look into this matter. And and there was one more reason also. The political parties were also blaming the government that the radio is being heavily used by the party in power to, make their announcements. And they the opposition parties used to blame the government that the radio is being heavily used as a mouthpiece of the government, and the government, whatever wants to say, uh, yeah, they used to say through radio. And with this, they can definitely influence the people, because the radio maximum time talks about the achievements of the government and not about the opposition or the other parties. So this is how the other party will not get space. And the other party, if they do not talk about the other parties, how would they fight election and how would they come into power in future? So this is how the political parties made an agenda, and they promise the people that if we come to power, we definitely will separate radio and television, and they'll make radio and television free from the control of the government. Also, the autonomy. This was called the autonomy issue of radio. So 1965 was the, after these achievements, government established a committee, which was called Chanda Committee, and this Chanda Committee was to look after the autonomy issues and the problems of autonomy in radio and television. And they, it was Justice Chanda who was the head of that committee, and under his uh, chairmanship, this committee was formed. There were some 11 members who were journalists and people working in different profession, and they were clubbed together and they formed a committee by the government. And there were some people who were retired judges also from the court, Supreme Court or High Court, and they, carried out a study on radio and television, and they submitted a report, and they suggested the government, first of all, to make a trust on the basis of, BBC. And similar to BBC, they wanted on the same model, the way BBC is being run. So they wanted that Indian television should also run like this, and there should be trust, like, and they also suggested a name which was Akash Bharti that time. And later on, that same trust, or that the name they suggested turned into Prasar Bharti. Now what we see is Prasar Bharati. So this is how they suggested that the television should be removed from the control of the government, and radio also should be separated, and they should be, two different units of electronic media, and they should not be under the control of the government. So and then Akash Bharti should be a trust which should be responsible for both of these electronic media units, and there were other recommendations also. So this is how we talked about the initial development of television, how television came to India, and there are other milestones also. Uh, the national broadcasting, the color broadcast, the live broadcast, the site experiment. There are a lot of things we need to discuss, we need to learn about. So the time doesn't allow us to go beyond this. So by this, we come to an end of this session, and definitely in the next session, we would carry out this topic from here only, and we'll be studying about the different milestones of television. So till then,